I'm just letting you guys know.
Well, and if anything comes out that you like are like, oh, scratch that.
Yeah.
Just tell us and Jesse will cut it out.
Yeah.
Right.
I have nothing. I hold nothing back. So.
Oh, that's even better.
Open book.
Right. Hey guys, if you're listening to the podcast, if they're hearing this, they're obviously listening to the podcast, right? Right. If you're enjoying this podcast or you just want to support the podcast, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, turn on the notifications. Thank you for the support. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Sorensen's Ace Hardware, located at 402 Washington Avenue in Los Banos. Proudly serving the community since 1947. Please check out our friend at Sorensen's for all your hardware needs. Come on, guys, support those who support us. Thanks, Sorensen's. Sorensen's also has a Modesto location located at 1433 Coffee Road. Modesto, true value for all your hardware needs. For all of our people out in the Modesto area, please support those who support us. Thank you.
You gotta get uncomfortable to get comfort.
There's some help. It ain't on the way. It's already waiting for you.
This little pill right here could take over your life. And I found that out the hard way. Mission statement of this podcast highlights stories of people that I've met in my journey in recovery. All right, we're recording. So we're here with Jennifer. First of all, Jennifer, thank you for making the drive down to come see us, right? And we just met.
Yes.
And so I went to a meeting, and two people that I like super highly respect, right, and look up to in a lot of ways. They're like, at separate times. One's like, you got to interview this woman, and then like 20 minutes later, you got to interview this woman, right? And it made me feel good because obviously you vetted me through them, and my background check came back okay. They're like, he's all right, you can go, right? And so super grateful for you doing this and doing it quick too, like we just talked at the beginning of the week. So
yep,
thank you. Right. And so so what's going on with you, Jennifer?
Well,
that's a loaded question, right?
Right. I mean, in which way?
In any way you want to express it. I just figure it's an easy way to start.
That's right. So right now we are working on some things in the job. We've got some changes happening. I've been clean a long time, so things are easier to deal with today.
Right.
But I've been at the same job in the same company for 25 years. So I'm going through some major changes there. Working with some new sponsees because, my higher power has a good sense of humor. So always likes to throw the crazy ones at me sometimes, right when I'm in the middle of crazy. And so that's always fun because it gets me closer to my higher power when I'm working with the sponsees, right? And so they always come right at the right time.
Right.
And so we're just cruising, cruising through, trying to get some vacations on the books. This year's been a little slow. We had some medical setbacks this year. So, yeah.
Life's in full swing.
Right. Yeah.
So you said you've been clean a long time. So actually, what's your clean date?
May 14th, 1997.
1997.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? That's
26.
26 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So like, what does that mean to you?
Well, it means everything. I wouldn't be here today in the nice car that I drove up in, or the nice house that I live in, or the nice clothes that I'm wearing, the shower that I had this morning.
Right.
None of that would be possible without it, without that day. That date is the most important date in the world.
Right. I get it. I got mine right here on my arm, right? And when
Mine's on my shoulder. Yeah.
My sponsor was like, man, that's a commitment.
That's a commitment. I just got mine last year, by the way, when I had 25 years. So I waited a minute. But
yeah, it is probably a lot more modest than that.
It is. It's just a little guy. But
this is huge. I'm like, well, regardless, I love this date,
That's
right? And no matter what happens, this is always important, no matter what.
That's right.
And pick a clean date I like, and I love it, and I want to keep it forever.
That's the date life actually started for me.
Right.
I wasn't an addict that needed to get clean and get my life back. I needed to get a life, period. Yeah. There wasn't anything to get back because I started using at a young age. I was actually, I had addictive behaviors from the gate.
So let's get into it. Like, what did that look like for you, right? Like, I always... Like, for people watching this, especially the unengaged, right, they're going to look at you and be like, this woman's not an addict. You don't know what it's like, right? And even when I seen you walk into the room, like the way you carried yourself, right? You had a sense of purpose. You were happy, no matter what was going on, right? You've elaborated to me a little bit what you're dealing with, but you couldn't tell, right? You walked in with a sense of grace and a big smile. So, for the unengaged, you can qualify yourself however you want, but like, what did it look like for Jennifer? And you can go as far back as you want.
So I'm not sure if we're born addicts. I don't think it's in our DNA. I think we're born with a clean slate,
right.
But circumstances and environments can lead to certain things. For me, the environment that I grew up in led me to feel like I had to lie a lot. It led me to feel like who I was and my feelings weren't valid. That's the environment that I grew up in unintentional by the people around me. But they lived in such a way that, there wasn't any space for sensitivity. There wasn't any space for feelings. There wasn't any space for doing anything wrong, really. So I just lied. I was a liar from the minute I could talk, and I was a runner from the minute I could walk. And I ran from everything, and I lied about everything because my environment taught me that that's what I needed to be, that who I wasn't good enough. Who I wasn't okay. You have feelings, you're crying, go in the other room and figure it out and come back when you're ready to talk to us.
Right.
Well, how does a 5-year-old figure it out, right? And I was raised in a family with mostly men, so feelings were not. I have all brothers. My dad has all brothers. My cousins are all boys. So I was raised in a very aggressive environment, and I just didn't fit the mold. They all partied, they all drank, they all used drugs, they all held down jobs. Every one of them, even my own parents. I come from a long, long line of addicts and alcoholics. Successful, though, to a certain degree. I don't know if they're successful here or here, but they're successful what it looks like on the outside.
Right. And with the self-diagnosis, well, people got a lot of things going on. It's usually the last thing they're going to say is, I got a problem.
Right. I was the problem. What I had going on, because as I became a teenager and still had no coping skills whatsoever, everything was lie, lie, lie. I would lie about the color of the sky if I thought that it would get me what I needed that day.
Right.
It didn't matter what it was. So when you come in and then you become a teenager and you're going to school, well, lying doesn't work that well when you lie every time you go into a classroom about your homework, about why you're late, about this, about that. It just was lie on top of lie on top of lie. And so everything started to catch up to me about my junior year in high school. And it became very evident that I may have been smart enough to pass the classes, but I could care less about any of it.
Right.
I could care less. And in my family, that's not how we did it. So it became clear at that point that I stood out from the family, even though, like I said, they were active users and active drinkers, and very much partying was at the center of our family unit. It didn't look that way on the outside. I looked that way on the outside. People could see that I wasn't going to graduate high school. I started out high school as a star swimmer and a baseball player and, all kinds of things. And it just didn't end that way. It didn't end that way. The worlds collided. And when the worlds collided, the dark side won.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a scary part about, raising kids, is because everything can look good on the outside, but nobody really knows what's going on the inside unless you let them know. Right. And like parenting, right, is difficult. Right. And raising my kids, right, like I understand, like I've seen that parenting model, like kids are meant to be seen, not to be heard, right? Like that old school harsh. And we don't do that with my kids, right? We're very aware and try and get into feelings and stuff like that. But sometimes it would be easier just to be like, get out of my face, right? So I can see both sides of it, right? But I know right from wrong today.
We do. And it takes time and it takes selflessness to let a child be who they are and to express who they are, right? And to express their emotions. They don't know what their emotions are. I had no idea. I just knew that whatever they were was wrong.
Right.
Was wrong. That no, that's not okay. We don't do that here. Don't cry. Don't go hide yourself until you pull it together. That's the message that I got, right? And so it takes a lot of selflessness and a lot of patience that only people who have been where we've been might fully understand.
Right.
And I think we make better parents at a certain degree, at a certain level, because we we can relate our behaviors to some of those things that happened. I can relate my behaviors, and I can relate children's behaviors today. And I can see, oh, when I say that, that's what happens. I say that, but they hear something else.
Right.
Because that's what happened to me, is that they were just saying, pull yourself together, get your crazy out of here or whatever. But in my mind, I heard, whatever you got going on isn't okay.
Yes.
So be somebody else. Right. And so we see that now. And so I can see where certain words or certain situations, a child hears it totally different. And as long as I use my experience instead of being frustrated, because we do that too. Kids are, they can be annoying little turds sometimes. Yeah. And we want to just be like, no, because I said so, bye-bye.
Right.
I don't want to explain myself to you today. There's going to be days like that too.
Yeah.
But as long as it's not like that 100% of the time, we're giving them a better chance. That's the way I feel about it, is that I'm giving them, whether they be kids, nieces, nephews, friends, kids, whatever, taking that time with them gives them a better chance than I had.
Right.
I was ready-made to be a drug addict. I mean, I was ready-made. I knew that you weren't allowed. I knew that we didn't talk about anything that happened in our house. You don't talk about it. You don't feel. And well, those are perfect for the disease, right? Those are perfect. We don't talk. We don't feel, period. I was ready-made for it. And I was a giant gaping hole that had no place in my world. I didn't have a place in my world. And so that's where my place was. I found my place.
So you talk about like the behaviors you learn at a young age, right? To the lying and all this stuff. So once high school stops, is that where the disease picks up for you?
For me, it was about junior year of high school. A friend of mine's brother was a cocaine dealer, and he was older than us, and he used to store his stash in her closet at their parents' house in her shoes. And, he thought it was safe. No one's ever going to find it there. Well, it wasn't really safe because we were taking it all. So, so that was the start of that journey. Up until that point, it was just a little here and there, drink here and there, whatever, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But until that was available to us basically 24/7, then it really took off. And I became the addict, like it was in her closet. So she had full control over when and where and how much and everything else. But I would go into her house, tell her mom I left something in her room, like my backpack or some bullshit, so that I could go in and take more drugs. Right. I became that girl that was doing it way more than anybody else, was now stealing it at a young age, the first chance that I got, and that just carried through. I mean, I was the drug addict that would steal it from you and help you look for it.
Right.
100%.
And then, so, I mean, it's with cocaine being the first thing, I mean, it's got to, because I remember, I can tell you the first time I used cocaine, and it was a feeling like, I still remember that feeling like it was yesterday, right? Like I was, and I don't often glamorize my drug use, but like we were talking before, like I constantly ponder, like, am I really a drug addict, right? And I was thinking about it, and I could take myself back to that time, and if I play in the disease long enough, right, it'll become attractive, right? And so I learned to play out the tape, right? I know where that stuff gets me.
That's right.
But I mean, it's got to explode after that, right?
I knew I was a drug addict early on because I was that one that the party never stopped. My friends would drink and then they would go to school the next morning, or they would do a line of Coke and they would go to school the next day. I was the one going, when is the next one?
Right.
Like it consumed me. It consumed me. And then it moved on, to other drugs that were cheaper and faster. And, because Coke, there's never enough. I mean, this table could be piled this high with cocaine. It still wouldn't be enough. It just wouldn't be enough. So.
And I get it, right? As soon as you do that one, I'm already waiting for the next one.
That's right.
Right? Like I understand that feeling. And I thought everybody was wired that way.
No.
Right? But I guess they're not, right? Some people talk about, like my friend over here, he could have 2 drinks and then be like, oh, I've had enough. Yeah. Right?
What does that even mean? Yeah.
Right?
Or leave a half a drink on the table when it's time to leave the restaurant. Wait, what?
Yeah. No.
Are you sure you're going to leave that?
Yeah. Or are you going to leave yours? Let me finish that for you. Right?
Yeah. So for me, when I didn't graduate high school, Then it became really obvious to my parents that there was a problem. Again, it wasn't the using or the drinking that was a problem. That was perfectly acceptable in my family. It was the not being able to make it look good and do it at the same time.
I get that too.
Yeah. So like I said, it wasn't the drinking, it wasn't the using. None of that was problematic because everybody in my family did it. And I mean, I saw my dad do coke for the first time, I think, when I was 12. And, you know, and same with my mom and my stepdad. And, you know, and the drinking was just to excess every day. So none of that was the issue. It was how I was perceived in the community, because I started getting arrested at the age of 18. Actually, the day I turned 18 was the first time I got arrested.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. And then it continued from there. I was just out there. I had no fear. That was another piece of the puzzle that made me ripe for the picking to be a drug addict. Don't talk, don't tell, don't feel, and fearless.
Right.
And the other piece of that was that you couldn't see me coming. Most drug dealers, most thugs, most whatever, they look a certain way. And when they walk past you on the street, you kind of feel it. You're like, oh God, yeah, like I'm going to go on the other side of the street, right? You couldn't see me coming, you know, and I thought it was a good idea to, you know, like, you know, take a gun and kick somebody's door down and rob the drug dealer. Like that kind of stuff seemed like good ideas to me. Little different than good ideas I have today.
Right.
But like when I first got clean and my sponsor knew about some of the, you know, we had gone through a couple of steps but I was like, I pulled the plug and I'm like, you know, I'm not really sure about all this. Like, I'm cool. I didn't want to do the 4-step. And she's like, all right, well, let's just talk about that for a second. I said, you know, I got some really serious trust issues and I just don't think this is for me. And she goes, well, let's talk about trust for a second. So you would get in a car with a guy that you barely knew with a gun in your lap and go kick somebody's door down there. Again, you didn't know, to steal their drugs. Yeah. You don't have trust issues. I'm like, well, that's probably true. She goes, you have honesty issues.
Right.
Your problem is honesty. It's not trust. And because if you could trust that situation, that somehow you're going to come out of that alive, and you did, you made it, you're here, you know, you don't have trust issues. You have honesty issues.
And I got to ask you, like, in this whole cycle of insanity where these behaviors are starting to become normal to you, does the light come on at any time and be like, man, maybe I got a problem?
A lot. And so I just use more so it'd go away.
Right.
Yeah. Because I knew, like I said, growing up in the environment that I grew up in, even though drugs and alcohol were kind of the norm, my family was relatively successful as far as, you know, they had standings in the community. They had good jobs. They had friends, you know what I mean? They weren't doing what I was doing.
Right.
They were not doing what I was doing. So every time I would seek lower company, and the company kept getting lower and lower and lower and lower because I burned through my friends in high school. They were like, oh no, she's too much for us. Like I just knew that I was so different from everybody else. You know, I was out here. I was an outlier. I was the crazy one. Right. And so that meant that the groups of people that I hung around had to keep getting lower and lower because my behavior was getting lower and lower, and my self-esteem and my self-worth was getting lower and lower. Not knowing any of that at the time, I just thought, oh, he's got more going on than this guy, when really he was just a bigger douchebag, right? And so, but that's not what my brain told me at the time.
The things that we looked for weren't necessarily the things that we should be having in our lives, right?
He's got a bigger bag of dope. He's got a bigger gun or whatever it was. Right. Those things were what made me think we're moving up in the world,
right?
You know, when really we're steadily moving down. Yeah.
So I got to ask you, with all this stuff going on, being arrested at an early age and all this stuff, like, what was the pivot point for Jennifer where you said, hey man, like, I have to change something, like this isn't working for me?
So I had gone to rehab when I was 23. My parents drove me out of the area up north and left me there. And I had all this resentment. I couldn't put together that I was the problem yet. I was still blaming everybody else because that was a big part of my disease.
This guy too.
Blaming everybody else. And so they dropped me there, and I told the intake coordinator, I'm like, those two do fucking coke. And like, I was all crazy. I was crazy. You don't even know what they do in their free time. And this is not about me. And like, I went nuts. And so they left me there, and then visiting day came, and they drove up, and I will not see them. Like, the fucking queen will not see you now, like, I refused their visit, even though they drove 2.5 hours to get there. And I refused the visit because I was just so mad, and zero responsibility, zero accountability. I had no ability to take responsibility for anything, period. I couldn't do it. I was constitutionally incapable. And so I used the day I got out of that treatment center. My parents tried. I mean, they wanted to keep me up there because they thought my hometown was the problem. Little, obviously I'm the problem. It doesn't matter where I go. I'll create chaos wherever I go. So they drove up the day that I completed that treatment center in a brand new car. Didn't even have license plates on it yet. They got me a house up there. And I got loaded the day I left there at a Togos. At the time, Togos still served alcohol. And don't you know, this bougie ass had to have a glass of wine the day I got out of treatment in a Togos. Because I was, so whatever, engulfed back into the disease.
Well, I learned something new. I never knew that they served alcohol at Togos.
They used to, especially up in the wine country, because this was in Sonoma.
Got it, yeah.
And so I didn't get very far. I got to Togos for a sandwich and ended up drinking the same day I got out of that treatment center. So when the light came on for me, I was in jail yet again. I lost track. I don't even know how many times I went to jail. A lot. This time, I was looking at some time, not just a month or 2 months or dry out or whatever I had done in the past. This time, I was looking at, they were real crimes, and something changed inside of me. Something changed. Like, I just knew, like, it wasn't cool anymore. I was sitting in the holding cell. I had my last use in a holding cell at the jail. It's not a pretty scene. You can only imagine. There's only so many ways that's going down inside of a jail cell by yourself.
Right.
There's only so many ways that this is going to happen, and drugs don't taste real good when you just put them in your mouth with nothing else,
right.
And so I was stuck between this place of, do I swallow it? Do I spit it out? I was just in this weird place that, drugs that I'd smuggled in my, pants, and I there was only one way it was going down my throat. And so I took that option, which was, the only water available in the room. And something hit me. That you just put jail toilet water in your mouth to get high. And something changed. I started noticing in that jail cell all the people that had etched their names in the wall. I'd never seen that. I'd never noticed it before. I didn't care. I was so, out of it or whatever. I started noticing, like, Jenny was here or whatever. I'm like, that is so lame. Like, what? Why are you scratching your name on the wall in the jail? This is weird. Like, so things started to stick out for me that I'd never noticed before, where I was like, this is actually the lame of the lame right now. Something's got to give. Something's got to give. And I was 26 years old. I had done more damage in the previous 10 years than most people do in a lifetime. And I didn't really make a decision that I wanted to get clean. I just knew something needed to change. I didn't go to any meetings when I was in jail. I went to court like 12 times, and I went to court one day and the judge said, I'm going to let you out. And this fear came over me. And I said, please don't. Please. I have nowhere to go. I literally have nowhere to go. And the judge is like, well, I've never really had anybody ask me to stay in jail before, but you're getting out anyway. And come back in 30 days, be clean, and show me that you're in a program. What the hell does that mean? I was like, what does that mean? So that night, I went back to the jail, and someone said, hey, do you want to go to a meeting? And I just said yes. I was like, yeah, I do. First time I'd said yes. And I went to a meeting, and the gal who shared I couldn't tell you today what came out of her mouth, but that night she told my story, whatever it was. I'm sure it was feelings, because that's what I relate to today more so than actions. I relate to this and this. You know, we come in here from different places. We come in here different ways. But what goes on here and what goes on here are not all that different for us. And for whatever reason, I let myself hear her. And I just knew that day that I had to figure it out. Like, and I was getting out in 3 hours to the street at midnight, not having any idea what I was going to do. Not having a quarter in my pocket to make a phone call from a payphone, because that's all we had back then. Nothing. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew that I needed to do something different, and I was willing. And she told my story. And if she could do it, I could do it. She got clean at 19. This gal, that's what I do remember about her story, is that she got clean at 19. And I was like, wow, that's mind blowing.
Right.
You know, and she was like 30 at the time. And I was like, wow. And so I got out, I walked the streets. I went, at the time, the Kinkos, they used to be called, had like free phones for business people. Don't you know, I had a lot of business to do. And so I used their free business phone to make some calls. I opened up the phone book, and all that was in there that I could find was like, it said AA hotline. And I called this number, and this guy answered. And he's like, where are you? And I told him, I said, I'm on this corner in Campbell. And he's like, okay, would you go with me if I come pick you up? And I'm like, what have I got to lose? I don't know this guy from Adam, you know? And so then he came, he drove me to a treatment program that was only about 3 blocks from where we were. It was like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. It was the next day after I got out of jail. And by some miracle, the director of that program was still there and opened the door and let me in. And I had a backpack. That's all I had. Clothes that didn't fit anymore. A backpack that had like top ramen falling out of it, you know? And he called my mom. Was like, we're going to get you in and we're going to do this. I said, well, good luck with that. Nobody in my family had spoken to me forever since I blew that other chance at the other rehab, you know? They were all done with me. So he called her, and she said, no, it'll be a cold day in hell that she'll get $1 out of me. And, you know, he tried all the angles. Well, she came here. She's, you know, she's not in trouble. She's seeking this out. He tried all the angles, right, that we try now. And she said, I don't give a shit. I don't care what you do with her. Turn to the street. And for whatever reason, it was the beginning of all the God shots. Right. It was the beginning of all of the miracles that were being set up in my favor that I didn't see at the time. But the fact that I was allowed to stay with $0 in a private program that I've come to find out does not happen very often. Right. You know, I know that now. And he let me stay, and he kept trying to work on my mom and she never paid a dime for me. But she did pay for somebody else. She wrote them a check and said, let someone else go through treatment. But the miracle happened. Right. And it was because I was paying attention. Anytime prior to that, I would use at meetings. I would just go to get the court card signed. I would do whatever. I'd use in the bathroom thinking nobody knew anything, you know, like we don't know, right. You know, that people are loaded at a meeting. But in my mind, I had this on lock. You guys couldn't tell. You didn't know who I was, you know. And all the while, obviously everybody was like, oh God, keep coming back. And I was like, keep coming back. And so I started to pay attention. I started to listen. I still wasn't 100% willing to do what was being asked. I still thought that there was no way that you guys were this happy. There was no way that you guys were completely clean. And there was no way that all the things that you were saying, you were just talking out the side of your neck to get us in, to keep the ball rolling, to keep the cult going, right? We had to keep, we had needed fresh blood to keep the cult going, right? So when they say the newcomer is the most important person in the room, I thought, I know why, you know? So.
But I get like so many things you said, right? Like being in jail, not wanting to come out. I remember early recovery, the regimen of the program is what I needed, right? And then even after 6 months in an inpatient treatment facility, I was scared to death to come out, right? But I had some things out there that I cared about more than myself, my kids, right? And so I was willing to take that leap of faith, but I understand that fear. And the fact that you stayed clean, being related, like talk about like a trap. Let's let this addict out of jail at midnight, right? And swim, fish, swim.
Right. And they still do that in our county. They still let you out at midnight for some godly unknown reason. It's the weirdest thing.
Right.
Unless, well, nowadays a lot of people get driven from the jail directly to a treatment program in some cases. But if you have other cases that aren't drug related, they're still letting you out at midnight. It's so weird. It's just weird. I've never understood that. It's one of the reasons I do what I do outside of recovery in the community, to try and like change some of the things that we're setting people up for failure.
Right.
You know, and the only way to do that is to have a voice and to really champion, you know, for people who can't. I mean, obviously, if you're in jail, you have no voice at all.
Yeah.
You know, and not to say that I deserve to be there. You know, I'm not like one of these people that's like, oh, you don't deserve to be in jail. Sure you do. But when you get out, you deserve to have a fair chance.
Right.
You know, you deserve to have a fair chance. You deserve to not have the deck already stacked against you the minute you get let out of jail.
And especially if you don't come out worse than you went in, right? Like in a lot of cases.
In a lot of cases.
Right. And so, and I want to get into what you're doing now here in a second, but I want to know, like, with all this learned behavior of the lying and all this stuff, because that doesn't untangle itself overnight, right?
No, it
like, what does Jennifer look like in early recovery? I'm sure you weren't like brimming with hope and that smile that you walked in with the other night. Like, what does that look like? As
an example, I went to jail at 2 years clean because I didn't allow myself to learn new coping skills. I was faking the funk really good. I wasn't using. It's the only thing I've done perfectly since May 14th, 1997. The only thing that I've done perfectly is not take anything. I thought it was a good idea to beat somebody up in a meeting because I knew her from way back when, and she happened to walk in, and I still had this like gaping hole that I had not allowed to be filled with a higher power and steps and solution and principles. And I hadn't allowed that all to start working in my life yet. So I was still, you know, still in the keep coming back group of people, keep coming back. And then I ended up in jail at 2 years clean for putting my hands on somebody. And that was another lightning rod moment of, it's time to do some work. You know, I still have my first set of steps that I did in those first 2 years. I did two sets. And I read those now just for entertainment purposes. Sometimes I'll read them to a sponsee. Like if I get a sponsee that is just like me and just has no ability to connect their behavior to these outcomes, I really couldn't. I mean, I thought it was everybody else's fault that these outcomes were the way that they were.
Like, you made me beat you up, right? Like, why'd you make me do
Girlfriend,
that?
you burnt my shit in the disease. Like, you had a bonfire in your backyard with my belongings. You had that one coming, you know? And that's really was my mindset, you know? And I was just holding on to when I'm going to run into this chick. It just so happens that it was at a meeting. And it was not a good scene, you know? And again, there was women in the rooms, and there still are to this day. And I'm luckily been given the grace to be one of them now, to where we can wrap women up. You know, we can wrap these youngsters up, and even the not so youngsters, but if they're new in recovery, they're a youngster to me. And share these experiences that you don't have to, you know. For me, the getting in touch, because I didn't know anything about myself. I had been playing a role for so long that was not me, that I wasn't really comfortable in. I lived by fear. I wanted, if you were afraid of me, then I could deal with you. But if you weren't, I'd have no use for you. And that came from, you know, coming from the family of origin that I come from. That's how all the men in my family operate. Well, I'm not a man. So it's a whole different thing when you've got this, you know, little blonde chick trying to like run shit, and not everybody's going to take you serious. Not everybody's going to take you serious. So you have to get meaner. And that I carried into the rooms, and I kept everybody over here. I practiced that behavior in recovery, that as long as you were afraid of me. You wouldn't ask me any questions. You wouldn't need to know who I really was. You wouldn't find out who I really was. Because if you found out who I really was, you wouldn't have nothing to do with me.
Right.
You wouldn't have anything to do with me if you knew who I really was.
All behind fear.
All behind fear. And so I turned that outward to make sure that you were afraid of me. So that you didn't ask any questions. You're like, oh, I'm just not going to fuck with that chick, you know?
Right.
And
That darn fly.
I know, right?
He moved on from me to you.
The hell, go over there.
Right.
So that, unfortunately, you know, I don't think our behaviors ever go away altogether. We're more conscious of them today. I have space between the thought and the action today.
Right.
I can still have those thoughts that happened 26, 30 years ago that got me in a heap of shit. Those thoughts still come. But there's space between the thought and the action today. And in that space comes things like grace, comes things like acceptance, comes things like patience, where I didn't have those before. It was thought and action, period. They were in the same sentence. If I thought it, I did it. Period. That was just the way I lived my life from like age 12 to 26, you know? And so I leave a lot of room for that space now. That space is very important to me in the fact that I finally accepted that, you know, some of those things, those bad messages and those bad thought processes, they're just not going to disappear. They're not just going to fall off and be like, oh, you're struck fucking perfect. You know, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So I allow space today. I let it come. You know, I let the thought come and I laugh and yeah, it probably would be fun to, you know, run that car right off the road and see what happened. I'd like to watch it. Like to watch it crash right into the reservoir. Yes, I would. But obviously I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I'm not going to do that today. So, and that's drastic, but even in little thoughts, even in words that come out of my mouth, because, you know, sometimes we hear something, we say, you know, we want to be like, no, my point is valid and I need to get it out there. No, it's really, you don't need to do anything. Nobody needs to hear what you have to say in every situation, you know? And so I allow a lot of space today. And that's what's been helpful for me, is to just let the thoughts happen and not beat myself up because I have the thoughts, right? They're going to happen. They're going to happen. And so I just let the thoughts happen. I let them pass and I fill them with different things today. Luckily, I've got some tools that I can fill them with. I've got people I can talk to.
Yeah.
I've got people that will call me on my shit today.
Well, thank God for a support group.
Thank God.
Because I too have the craziest thoughts sometimes, yeah. Right? And I have to separate that, right? I go back to the in the book where it says, you know, like, I don't have a moral deficiency, I have a disease.
That's right.
Right? And I, as long as I'm conscious of this, I'm ahead of the game for myself.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the first time I've ever heard anybody describe it as space. Mm-hmm. Right. And I like that. I could take that and I can use it today. Yeah. Right. And I feel like, you know, in certain situations, that space is shorter than others.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, it's a beautiful way to put it. Right. And so I appreciate that. And so you talk about, you know, like, so how do things change after your second year, after that incident? And I'm sure the people, they told you to keep coming back, right? Even
they
though,
sure did,
right? And what a change, right? Because I'm sure, like, people like myself and like you, I'm sure you do said behavior, you're punished. People don't want you to come back, and these people are probably telling you, "Hey, keep coming back."
It was the first time that I had engaged in behavior like that, where people said, keep coming back. Exactly. Because if I had done that in the disease or anytime you have a little scuffle out there, it's you just don't go back to wherever you caused that little drama, right?
Yeah.
And so in this situation, it was the first time I had that behavior and had people say, keep coming back. And that caused the light to go on for me.
Yeah.
That caused the light to go on for me. And people were still clapping, and people were they still wanted to hear that, you know, you hadn't beat anybody up today. They still wanted to hear, you know, that you hadn't stolen anything today. They still wanted to hear all that stuff. And it was obviously there was some restrictions on, you know, my participation in certain areas.
Right.
But, you know, it became the caveat for me to get honest.
Right. Well, and then you were allowed to earn your way back, right? These people allowed you to still participate and
The grace that I was shown
right.
taught me what grace really was. And, and I say it a lot of times that if justice had been served in my situation, whether it was then, now, especially when I was using, if justice had been served, I wouldn't be here today. I say that. I say that a lot when I share meetings or even just get called on or whatever, that's grace.
Right.
That if justice had truly been served, I wouldn't be here talking to you today.
And so then I'd imagine after this point forward, the real changes start happening.
Correct. We finally were able to grab a little bit of honesty that could not be grabbed before. Yes. That willingness to tell the truth, the willingness to get in touch with what the truth was where I had to start, because I honestly wasn't even able to, I couldn't even decipher. I had lived so long with playing a role and telling you exactly what you needed to hear to get what I needed to get that I almost didn't know the difference.
Right.
It was such a natural state of being that it took some work. It took some serious work to get in touch with. I mean, I had to get back to basics of like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite number? Like, I did not know any of those things. If someone would have asked me that, kids love to ask those questions. What's your favorite color? And I have no idea. I don't even know what you're talking about, So I had to get really basic on that, back to some serious self-discovery. Like I said, there wasn't anything to get back. I wasn't an addict that got here needing to get anything back. I needed to get rid of everything and get a life. I needed to get rid of everything that I knew, everything that I thought, everybody that I knew, and learn a completely new way to live. And so that line from our basic text has had such an impact on me since day one, that any addict, can lose the desire to use and find a new way to live, right? And like I believed that.
Right.
I believed that when I heard that. And then I started to believe that you guys were telling the truth, that you weren't lying and going home and smoking a joint, because I did think that too, that you just wanted us in for the cult. And that's why you told us we were the most important person in the room, because you needed new people to keep a cult going.
Right. Well, and until we find that common bond, right, we can't trust.
Right.
Like you talked about, like your sponsor saying, "Will you trust that guy with the gun on the lap and all this stuff?" Well, you had a common bond.
Right.
So you had a reason to trust.
We definitely, yeah.
And so now you want change. And so now you have a reason to trust.
Yeah.
Right. It's coming full circle. And talk about finding a new way to live. Like you sure done that, right? Like, so once this change starts happening, what starts happening in your life? Because I know you got some really cool and exciting things that you've done that you're still doing, right? And
yeah, so for me, it was just about getting back to basics. And then I had started working at a treatment center when I was about 11 months clean, which made it even more embarrassing that I was arrested at 2 years. Yeah, made it even more embarrassing. But anyway, that's a whole nother Oprah version. But so I started realizing that, we are everywhere, that we do have a voice, that what we say matters. But the reality is, if we're not talking about it in an open way, in an open forum, we can talk about it with ourselves all day.
right.
We're just regurgitating to each other what we already know. And a lot of it's helpful because I can hear something from you, you can hear something from me that I hadn't thought of yet, or thought of something in a different way. I mean, I learn from my predecessors every day. I learn from newcomers every day. One time, a gal with 13 days gave me the message that I needed to hear on a certain day, So there is nothing that separates us here, but our information is pretty much the same.
Right.
The information needs to get to the people that don't have it. The information needs to get to the family members and the loved ones that don't have it, that think, it's so easy for a parent or a husband or a wife or a sister or a brother or a friend or a coworker or whatever to think, wow, that person's really got a problem and they need to go away and come back fixed.
Right.
That's kind of the way people think about it. Come back and be a successful drinker, please. Come have a glass of wine with me. Like, no more of this staying out all night long and I don't know where you are for 3 days. they want that to stop, but they don't necessarily want it all to stop, because that changes their life too.
Right.
So to be able to get that information out to people, to understand that it's a disease and we are all or nothing people, that education became important to me. And having the platform that I had in my job, I became a part of a group of people in Santa Clara County that was designing the drug court in 1998. And our drug court in Santa Clara County became the model for all of California. And I got the privilege of being a part of that. And here I am, again, 2 years clean, sitting on panels with judges and district attorneys, and my voice mattered. My voice had never mattered before. Not ever since I was born, my voice didn't matter. I was a burden. I was a burden to my family, and then I was a burden to society, right? That's what that's how this brain operated. And so here I am thinking, once again, I'm in a place I don't belong, which was also quite interesting, getting arrested when you're doing things like that. Quite an interesting scenario. But I started to realize during that time that we really do, in the community at large, not just talking to each other, but as an addict had to get to a place where I wasn't uncomfortable telling people that weren't addicts that I was an addict.
Right.
It started there. Because, obviously it's in our name, anonymous, right?
Right.
But anonymous is also a choice. I have to keep everybody else's anonymity, but I'm responsible for me. And if I'm willing to break my anonymity because I believe it's going to be helpful somewhere down the line, then that's what I do. And I'm not a real taboo person. Like, I'm open conversations, even in public, standing in line at a store. You know what I mean? I'm not like, oh my God, don't talk about that. Don't tell anybody you're an addict. Like, that's what's going to keep us sick.
Right.
That's what's going to keep our kids sick. That's what's going to keep parents from recognizing what's going on with their children. It's so easy to close the door on it. It's so easy to just be like, oh, they're just teenage angst. But is it? How do you tell the difference?
Right.
You need the knowledge to be able to tell the difference. And so that for me led into public speaking, going up to Sacramento and speaking on recovery issues in front of, politicians in Sacramento, and swallowing my stomach down my throat, because at one point, I'm speaking to the governor of California, and it was just, and I had to learn real fast that you have a voice. And that was tough. I was very nervous for years. I didn't think I belonged, but I had a unique perspective, because being an addict and being able to speak on it in a public forum to people who aren't addicts is not something we all get to do.
Right.
It's not something we all get to do. And it brings a unique perspective, because most of the time people making the decisions for people like us are not addicts. People writing the laws, people making decisions for what happens in jail, people making decisions that you can't arrest drug addicts. Those are people who have no idea about the disease of addiction. They have no idea that being able to arrest a drug addict might actually save their life.
Right.
And so I've now been able to speak with police chiefs, and we've gone to Sacramento and talked about the fact that they've lost their ability to arrest people and bring addicts with us and say, the lights came on for me in the back of the cop car.
Right.
I couldn't even imagine if I was out there on the street and they couldn't arrest me. And they just had to write me a ticket and send me on my way. Like, I'm going to show up in court for a ticket. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep getting worse. And if I don't die, it'll be a miracle, And so using that platform and now having a different, unique perspective of being involved in the local government in the city that I live in, I bring even a little bit more weight to the table. It's opened up a couple more doors, and for me, it's so important. It's so important to get that message, because we can help we can help adults when they become drug addicts. We can help them if they make it there alive,
right,
and they have some willingness. But why aren't we doing it before? Why aren't we getting in there before that happens? Why aren't we talking about this? Now, they bring stuff into high schools. They do their best. They had that DARE program for a long time. A lot of my friends were graduates from DARE that are now in the rooms with me. And so Clearly what we were doing was not working.
Right.
We need to take a much more gut level approach. We need to take a much more honest approach. We need to help parents understand that it's not a place of shame. That's where the problem is that there's all this shame and, and like you just don't tell anybody about it. And it's in certain cultures, it's even worse.
Right.
We don't talk about that. We don't tell anybody about that. You need to go over there, get fixed, and come back to us. And we're not going to ever tell anybody that this happened. That's what most families want.
Yeah, one in communities at large, right? Like, and I think that's the sense of like this small town I live in, right? There's no help out here for people, right? They want you to go over there, get fixed, and then come back, right? And it doesn't
and suddenly
work
be a productive member of society,
right?
Yeah,
and it does, and with no opportunities in between,
right?
And it really doesn't work that way for people,
yeah.
And I think that's just amazing, right? Like all the things that coming from where you come from, right? Talking about how you had to learn to lie to live, right? And then all this crazy stuff and what you're doing now, you're truly a living testimony of what the program, a 12-step program, can offer a person.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's everywhere. I mean, that's the beauty. I believe that every person that's in recovery and stays in recovery has an amazing story of triumph, right? Has an amazing story. We all have hurdles that got us here. And we all have hurdles that we've had to jump to stay here. And everybody's story it's a story that needs to be told.
Right.
There should be TV shows about it. There should be movies about it. I mean, it should be much more mainstream, acceptable. We have some, movie stars that are in recovery, but they've kind of muddied the water a little bit. In my opinion, there's some high-end actors and actresses that are in recovery or they're clean or whatever, but they're not using the platform, right? They're not using the platform to talk about what we really do, to talk about what it's really like, to reduce the stigma, which is the number one thing that we need to do. Because once we're all in this together and we understand that it's not shame, it's not a moral deficiency, right. I'm going to murder that fly.
I know. I wish I could.
It's not a moral deficiency. It is a disease. And we need help. And just like if you had diabetes, you need to do certain things to keep it in check. We have to do certain things to keep it in check. I still have to go to meetings, 26 years clean. If the thought ever came into my mind that I didn't need meetings anymore,
right,
I would soon find out what happened to people that stopped going to meetings. And it wouldn't be pretty. I may not use today or tomorrow, but my behavior, I'm already on the brink of those behaviors half the time. So I can't even imagine, but that's the part that people don't understand, is that stigma about, and like I said, I have a little bit of a hard time with our, quote unquote idols in Hollywood that call themselves clean, but they're not using the platform to talk about what we're really doing here. The only person that really has is Russell Brand. I don't know if you've ever watched his stuff. He has a little bit different take on things, but he's honest.
Right.
He's honest about what we do and how this really works, The rest of them just kind of, I don't know. And some aren't even really clean. They just say they are.
Well, and I think that's the importance for like what we're trying to accomplish here, right? Is because the people a lot of times with the best message aren't the ones with the platform, right? There's so many amazing people that I meet just in meetings, right? Like you said, 13 days clean, 30 some years clean. It doesn't matter.
That's
Everybody that makes it in recovery for a day is a miracle.
That's right.
Right. And that's all we have. And the longer I stay, the more I understand one day at a time. Right. Because when I first got here, like I would go to this book study where I got clean and a lot of the people around there, I'm never going to use again, as long as I do A, B, and C. And the longer I stay, the more scary that gets. Right. But I could do it one day at a time.
Yeah. There's a lot of trouble with the word never.
Right.
Yeah.
It's heavy. It really is heavy, right? Because sometimes
or recovered. That's a troublesome word too.
Right, and that's what and I constantly have to explain to people in my life, how long do you have to go to those classes, right? And I'm like, well, if I want a chance of sticking around, I better keep coming back, right? All the time.
And my family still to this day is still all active drinkers. Everyone, I'm the only person in recovery in my family. Still a very long line of addicts and alcoholics. And they're supportive, They like me the way that I am now,
Right.
but they're not necessarily like thrilled about what I have to do to stay this way.
Right.
Again, it's 26 years later. Can't you just be fixed?
Right.
You know? And no, it doesn't work like that. What do you mean you need to leave Thanksgiving dinner and go to a meeting? Because I was at Thanksgiving dinner with you guys, so now I need a meeting. I
Right.
might need two. But that's a reality,
Yeah.
you know? And they don't get that. I mean, it's still, and then when my family starts really drinking, it doesn't matter how much time has passed. They still remember all the things that I did very vividly. They have no memory of themselves, but they have very vivid memories of all of my indiscretions, and they like to talk about them.
Well, as long as they're focused on you,
That's
they don't
right.
have to look at themselves.
100%. And so that's when I'm like, okay, time to go, you know. And I tell people that all the time, especially around the holidays, like, never feel like you have to sit there. We come here, we heal ourselves. Nobody else, we're not responsible for anybody else's healing. They're not going to get better just because we're better. They might, but not just because we're better, they're not going to get better.
Right.
You know? So now, not only do we have to deal with ourselves, we have to find a way to deal with them still being possibly toxic, still being using, drinking, whatever it may be. And you have to decide for yourself where that line is.
And I understand that because my family, like yours, is a party family,
Mhm.
right? We had the Christmas celebrations with over 100 people there because my great grandma. And the older I get, the more I see it unraveling
Mhm.
in front of me, and I see family members passing away, like stuff that
Yeah.
could have been avoided.
Yep.
And the more undesirable it is to me to be around these things, right? And I become an older person, and I don't want those things normalized for my kids.
That's right.
Right. And so I choose to dismiss myself a little bit earlier all the
Yep.
time. And some of the stuff is just not acceptable to me anymore. And that's okay.
No. And I have a hard time when, you know, my brother, who has 2 young boys, is taking shots at Jameson with my dad, and I know he's going to get in that car and drive him home.
Right.
Like, where is my line? Where am I going to fight my brother to like drive his kids home? You know what I mean? No. But there's so much that we deal with on a daily basis in situations like that now that we have this awareness, you know. And for me, that kind of stuff makes me really, really uncomfortable. So I generally will just leave before it gets to that point,
Right.
you know. And a lot of times I hear, oh, you think you're better than us, or you think you're somehow, you know, you've conquered the world, or, you know, and that's just them. And that's something that I share with, you know, with other people too, is that I have a young sponsee now who, her family's really, really serious about that. They are trying really hard to bring her back into their toxicity because it's more comfortable.
Right.
It's more comfortable for them. They don't have to look at anything of themselves. And that's really what it is. And so the message, I can't get that message to my family. I can't. There's no way. Being a living example is all I can do.
Right.
There's no way. I used to think that we needed to take the 12 steps into the elementary schools. Like, everybody should be doing these steps. Like, that was when we're going to do it we're going to meditate with the youngsters. We're going to do 12 steps. Everybody's going to do this, right? That was I thought if everybody did it, we'd all be great. But we do have platforms. We do have platforms, and we have to open doors. Like, the more doors that we can open to have these conversations with people who wouldn't normally have these conversations, the more acceptance, the more understanding, the more patience that people are going to have, instead of just brushing us off as useless drug addicts.
Right.
You know, because that is not the case. Every single one of us matter, whether we're still using or not. As long as we're above the dirt, we have a chance, you know, and that's the message that has to get out there. And so to be able to use different platforms to do that, I don't know if I haven't been able to see the fruits of any laborers, but I believe in my heart that no matter what, if you're in a room with 200 people, somebody's going to hear what they need to hear, and they're going to take it home to their family. And those people might take it to their family, and they might take it to the schoolyard, or they might, you know, it might take it to the church, or it might take it wherever, you know what I mean? Just getting the word out there that it's not a dirty little secret.
Right.
That's what we need to get past.
And we can recover.
And we do.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, man, I think did we miss anything? You know,
I don't think so.
right. So the last thing I always like to ask somebody is if somebody's listening to this, or somebody's hearing this and they're struggling in some sort of way, what would you say to that person?
that they're worth it, even though it doesn't feel like it right now. Your life is worth it. There is a life out there for you. Just reach out. There are people that will help. It may not seem like it right this minute, but we care.
Right.
We do care. The most important, I know it sounds cheesy and it seems cheesy and the newcomers don't believe it, but they're the most important person in the room. They really are. You know, we need you. We need you here. The disease, the game, all that stuff does not need you.
Right.
We need you here.
Perfect. Jennifer, thank you for doing this. And the last thing we always do is you owe me a hug.
Okay. We can do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, no, yeah.